You just opened a Maps app on your phone, typed in an address, watched a small blue dot move across the screen. You don't need to remember the route, don't need to notice anything you pass along the way, just follow the arrow. But hundreds of thousands of years ago, when your ancestors left their shelter to hunt, to gather food, sometimes walking dozens of kilometers through dense forest, they had no map of any kind. So how did they find their way home? The answer is stranger than you think. You might think they simply memorized a few landmarks, a large boulder, a bend in a river. That's true, but it's only a tiny part of the story. The real answer doesn't lie in what your ancestors saw around them. It lies inside their own skull, in a brain structure that science only truly began to understand toward the end of the 20th century. In 1971, the British neuroscientist John O'Keefe was studying the brains of rats when he discovered something strange. He implanted tiny electrodes into a brain region called the hippocampus, then let the rat wander freely inside a box. What he observed stunned him. Certain specific neurons fired only when the rat stood in one exact location in space, and never otherwise. When the rat moved to a different spot, those neurons went silent, and a different group of neurons fired instead. He called them place cells. Essentially, each of these cells acted like a living GPS marker, lighting up only when the body stood in the exact spot it represented. What made this discovery so groundbreaking wasn't just finding a new type of neuron. It was proving that the brain doesn't store space as some vague general impression. It builds an actual internal map, detailed almost down to individual cells, entirely independent of any image from the outside world. The rat didn't need to see the box to know where it was inside it. Its brain had already built its own living coordinate system, continuously tracking its current position on that system, in much the same way a GPS satellite tracks your position on the surface of the Earth. But place cells were only half the story. Years later, two Norwegian scientists, May-Britt Moser and Edvard Moser, discovered another type of cell, located in a neighboring brain region called the entorhinal cortex. This type of cell was even stranger. It didn't just light up at a single point. It fired in a regular hexagonal grid pattern, spread across the entire space the animal moved through, exactly like the lines on an invisible sheet of graph paper, pre-printed inside the brain. They called them grid cells. Together, place cells and grid cells form an internal positioning system, a living coordinate map continuously updating the body's position in space in real time. This discovery was so significant that in 2014, all three scientists were jointly awarded the Nobel Prize in Medicine. What's remarkable is that this system isn't some invention unique to modern humans, nor something you have to learn from a book. It's built-in hardware present in the brain of every mammal, including your most distant ancestors. When a prehistoric individual stepped out of their shelter in the morning, crossed a forest, went around a stream, and returned to the exact starting point by sunset, they weren't calculating a route the way you'd normally think of it. Their brain was silently recording every step, every turn, every distance through that very system of place cells and grid cells, building a living internal map in real time as they moved. But if this system is innate, why are some people so much better at navigation than others? This is where the story takes another interesting turn. The British neuroscientist Eleanor Maguire in the early 2000s decided to study a group of people with a very particular job: London taxi drivers. To be licensed, these drivers have to go through a grueling training process called the knowledge, memorizing roughly 25,000 streets, large and small, across the entire city, a process that typically takes 3 to 4 years. When McGuire scanned the brains of drivers who had completed this training, she found that their posterior hippocampus, the exact region containing place cells, was physically larger than in people who hadn't done this job, and the degree of enlargement was proportional to the number of years they had been driving. What does that mean? The ability to navigate isn't just something you either have or don't have. It's more like a muscle. The more you use it, the more it physically grows. McGuire's research didn't stop there. She also compared drivers who completed the training to those who started but dropped out partway through. Only the ones who persisted and memorized the entire street network to the end showed a clear change in brain structure. This further supported the idea that it's the ongoing practice of navigation itself, not some innate trait present from the start, that produces the physical difference in the brain. Now think back to your ancestors. A typical prehistoric person, over the course of their entire life, might have traveled dozens of kilometers every week, crossing constantly changing terrain, memorizing the location of water sources, hunting grounds, safe shelters, the territorial boundaries of rival tribes, all relying entirely on their own brain, with no outside tool to help them. In other words, your ancestors almost certainly trained their internal navigation system far more intensely than most modern humans do every single day for their entire lives. This wasn't unique to the prehistoric peoples of Europe or Africa that scientists usually study. It's shown just as strikingly in many indigenous communities that maintain traditional ways of life until fairly recently. Ancient Polynesians could cross thousands of kilometers of open ocean from island to island without a compass or any modern instrument, relying only on the position of the stars, the direction of swells bouncing off distant unseen land, the color of clouds reflecting light from an island not yet visible. Aboriginal Australians developed an entirely different system, often called song lines, in which cross-continental routes were encoded into songs, with each melody and set of lyrics corresponding to a specific sequence of terrain to travel through. Neither of these systems was a map drawn on paper. They were living maps, stored and passed down through direct experience, through story, through song, woven into the very brain structure of each generation. This is where the story really flips your assumptions. Your ancestors' brains, continuously trained through navigating real physical space themselves, almost certainly had a place cell and grid cell system operating far more powerfully than your brain does today. So what about you? Some recent studies have started asking the opposite question about modern humans. When you constantly rely on the blue dot on your phone's map, instead of memorizing the route yourself, your brain no longer needs to strongly activate its place cell and grid cell system the way it once did. Like a muscle that's rarely used, your ability to navigate space on your own risks, gradually weakening over time, not because the biological structure has disappeared, but because it's rarely asked to work at full capacity anymore. The irony is that the map app on your phone was built so you would never get lost, but it may be quietly weakening the very ability your ancestors once had to develop to a razor-sharp degree just to survive an ordinary day. So next time you open a map app and watch that little blue dot move across the screen, remember that inside your skull, the same ancient navigation system your ancestors once used to cross an entire continent without any map at all is still fully intact. The blue dot on your screen is just a very recent copy. The real map, the first map humanity ever had, is still quietly running right now, right behind the very eyes reading these words.